The billionaire crumpled her Christmas card on live TV, laughed, called it cute activism from a nobody. But within hours, that same nobody, a 12-year-old black girl from Georgia, had ignited a movement too big to control. Cameras turned, CEOs panicked, and just as the world watched her rise, he vanished. But what she exposed next, no one was ready for it. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was the second week of December in Macon, Georgia. The streets were laced with blinking lights, front yards dressed in inflatable reindeer, and car radios whispered Mariah Carey, on a loop. But inside a modest aging house with chipped paint and uneven floorboards, 12-year-old Samara Field sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, with her hands stained in ink, and her heart full of something she couldn't quite name. There were no twinkling lights in their living room, no gifts hidden under a tree, just the soft hum of the space heater and the sharp scent of glue as she pressed another paper star onto a folded card. Samara wasn't thinking about toys or holiday movies. She was thinking about how she felt invisible, about the way her teachers always called on other kids, the way store clerks followed her around aisles, the way people acted surprised when she spoke clearly, intelligently. "You're so articulate," they'd say, as if it were praise, as if it were shocking. Every word stayed with her like pebbles in her shoes. Small, irritating, impossible to ignore. She had been working on these cards for over a week now, pouring her thoughts into hand-cut paper folded into imperfect rectangles. Some had drawings of Black Santa. Others featured kids holding hands across a snowy background, but each one carried the same line written in neat, shaky cursive. "What if someone like me mattered to someone like you?" Samara's mother, Arlena, a single parent and a public school teacher fighting to stay afloat, had helped her find addresses online. CEOs, governors, social media influencers, people Samara believed held the keys to doors she could never walk through. Among them was Braden Holt, a name even Samara couldn't ignore. The billionaire tech mogul was everywhere. News panels, Super Bowl commercials, magazine covers. He wasn't just rich, he was treated like royalty. Braden Holt was the kind of man who never had to think about girls like her. She glued one last silver star onto the corner of his card. It read, "Dear Mr. Holt, this year I don't want toys. I want to matter. To not be followed in stores. To not be the last picked. To feel safe in my own skin. I want a future where girls like me can dream like boys like you. Merry Christmas." She signed her name in red ink, placed the card in an envelope, and slid it into the stack her mom was mailing. At that same hour, across the country in a towering glass building above downtown San Francisco, Braden Holt was reviewing pitches for his latest AI project. His office overlooked the skyline, his desk clear of clutter, his mind untouched by anything resembling empathy. Surrounded by sycophants and strategists, Braden lived in a world where handwritten notes from children didn't exist, not unless they came from donors' kids or PR-approved events. When the envelope landed in a box of holiday mail delivered by his overwhelmed assistant, it barely registered. Braden didn't open a single one. "Put them in the guest pile," he told his assistant, Lydia, motioning toward the closet, filled with boxes of unopened letters and fan mail. "We'll donate them to the interns or something." Lydia paused at the card's strange weight. It was the only envelope with childlike doodles and a clear sense of emotion in its handwriting. Something made her hesitate. But Braden had already moved on to his next meeting, speaking fast about launch dates and global market strategies. The card ended up in the pile, unacknowledged, unread. But fate doesn't always stay quiet. 3 days later, in a downtown Atlanta post office, a janitor named Curtis was sweeping near the outgoing bin when he noticed a torn envelope half hanging out the side. Curiosity made him pick it up. Inside was a duplicate of Samara's card, a second version she had made but forgotten to send. He read it once, then again, his chest tightened. That night, Curtis posted a photo of the card on his Twitter page, captioning it, "Y'all, a little black girl wrote this. I don't know her name, but someone rich needs to see it." Now, the internet moved faster than anyone expected. Within hours, the tweet was retweeted by a local activist, then a celebrity, then a national talk show host. It spread not because it was cute, but because it was raw. The line, "What if someone like me mattered to someone like you?" hit a nerve in a world already burning with unspoken injustice. People weren't just sharing it, they were sobbing over it, writing essays, filming reaction videos, starting threads about the times they'd felt invisible too. The next morning, Dear Billionaire was trending #1 on Twitter. Samara didn't know yet. She was at school, wearing a thrift store hoodie 2 sizes too big, and reading aloud in class while her teacher corrected her in that overly sweet tone reserved for those kids. Her phone was off. But her mom knew. Arlena had woken up to hundreds of notifications and missed calls. Someone had traced the handwriting on the card back to a Christmas craft post Arlena had shared on Facebook weeks earlier. Samara's name, still misspelled by most, was already becoming a digital symbol for a movement neither of them had planned. Back in Braden Holt's office, Lydia was scrolling through Twitter, absent-mindedly during a lunch break when she froze. The trending post. The handwriting. The card. Her eyes darted to the donation pile. She leapt up, shoved open the closet, and began tearing through envelopes. Paper scattered. Ribbons fell. When she found it, the original card, uncreased, unopened, she felt her heart pound in her ears. She turned to the corner window, where Braden sat oblivious in another Zoom meeting, discussing growth projections. He had no idea that the same card he had dismissed as meaningless was now the center of a social firestorm. No idea that the girl's words had already reached more people than any of his campaigns. No idea that the internet had crowned her a voice of truth, and him the face of indifference. But Lydia did. And as she held the card in her hand, something inside her shifted. Just then, her phone buzzed again. She looked down and saw a message from a fellow staffer. "Did you see this? The card's all over Twitter, and people are demanding Braden respond. ASAP. The card should have stayed buried." That was the quiet truth of systems like Braden Holt's world. Things only existed if powerful people decided they did. But Curtis didn't know any of that. When he stood in his small apartment in Atlanta staring at his phone long past midnight, rereading the words written in a child's careful handwriting. He had worked 12-hour shifts cleaning buildings where people like Braden Holt made decisions worth millions, sometimes billions, while he scrubbed coffee stains off marble floors no one thanked him for. The card didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a mirror. Curtis hesitated before posting. He wasn't an activist. He wasn't famous. He barely had a following. But he had lived long enough to recognize pain when it was written plainly, without filters or performance. The line that wouldn't let him sleep wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost embarrassed. "I've learned early that powerful white men don't see girls like me." It wasn't angry. That's what made it unbearable. It sounded like acceptance, like surrender. When Curtis finally pressed post, he didn't tag Braden Holt. He didn't add hashtags. He didn't expect anything. He simply wrote that someone needed to see it. Then he put his phone down and went to bed, believing, foolishly, that the world would ignore it the way it always did. By the time he woke up, his phone was vibrating so hard it had slid off the nightstand and onto the floor. Notifications stacked endlessly. Names he didn't recognize, replying, retweeting, quoting. The image of the card had escaped him. It was being shared with captions filled with rage, heartbreak, recognition. People weren't responding to Curtis anymore. They were responding to Samara. They were responding to themselves, to childhood memories of being overlooked, underestimated, erased, to teachers who doubted them, bosses who talked over them, police officers who watched them too closely. The card had become a confession booth for a country that never admitted how much it hurt. By mid-morning, the post had crossed into places Curtis had never imagined. Verified accounts, journalists, celebrities who spoke carefully, but shared quickly. The line about powerful white men was pulled out, enlarged, screenshot, placed against backdrops of boardrooms and tech campuses. Someone added the words, "This is America," beneath it, and that image alone traveled faster than the original tweet ever had. In Macon, Arlena Field sat at her kitchen table, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. Her phone kept ringing, buzzing, chiming with strangers asking for interviews, permission, confirmation. Some messages were kind, others felt invasive, demanding pieces of Samara she wasn't ready to give. Arlena watched her daughter across the room, still in pajamas, unaware that her quiet Christmas wish had exploded into something uncontrollable. Samara noticed something was wrong before her mother said a word. She always did. Kids like her learned early how to read rooms, faces, silences. "Why are you shaking?" she asked softly, her voice small but steady. Arlena tried to smile. It broke immediately. She showed Samara the phone. Samara didn't smile. She didn't cry. She stared at the card, at her own handwriting blown up on a screen filled with strangers' reactions. Her words looked heavier there, louder than she'd ever imagined them being. "I didn't mean for people to be mad," she said quietly. "I just wanted them to know." That was when Arlena understood something she hadn't fully processed yet. This wasn't about going viral. This was about truth finding oxygen. Across the country, inside Braden Holt's glass tower, the energy had shifted. Assistants whispered. Phones buzzed constantly. Screens flashed graphs not related to profits or growth. Lydia sat frozen at her desk, watching the hashtag climb. "Dear Billionaire. What if I spoke? Girls like me." None of them mentioned Braden by name at first, but everyone understood who the words were aimed at. Power didn't need to be named to be accused. Someone finally tagged him. A journalist with millions of followers posted the image of the card beside a photo of Braden smiling on stage at a tech conference, captioned, "This little girl wrote to Power. Power threw it away. Now Power has to answer." That was the moment the narrative sharpened. The internet did what it always did. It dug. People found Braden's history of dismissive comments about diversity initiatives. Old interviews, where he called racism an overused excuse. Clips of him interrupting black women during panels resurfaced. None of it had caused damage before. Context changed everything. Now each clip felt like confirmation. Curtis watched it all unfold in disbelief. He hadn't meant to start this. He had simply refused to stay silent. When reporters reached out to him, he declined interviews, afraid the story would shift away from Samara. But someone else didn't hesitate. A former Holt Industries intern posted a thread describing how holiday mail from random kids was routinely thrown away. She didn't name names, but she didn't have to. The replies exploded. People began demanding proof, demanding accountability, demanding Braden Holt acknowledge a 12-year-old black girl whose words had reached more hearts than any product he'd ever built. Samara went to school that day feeling the weight of eyes she didn't understand yet. Teachers whispered. A classmate asked if she was famous now. She shook her head, unsure how to explain that she felt smaller than ever. Fame didn't feel like power. It felt like exposure. That night, as the hashtag continued to climb, Lydia sat alone in the office long after everyone else had gone home. She held Samara's card again, reading it slowly, this time not as an assistant protecting her boss, but as a woman remembering her own childhood, the ways she'd learned to stay quiet to survive. She knew what the company would do. She knew how they would spin this. And for the first time since she'd taken the job, she wasn't sure she could participate. Braden Holt slept peacefully that night, unaware. His phone was on silent. His windows looked out over a city buzzing with conversations he couldn't control. The world was deciding who he was without him. By morning, his name sat at the top of every trending list. Not beside innovation, not beside success, but beside a child's Christmas card, and a question no amount of money could answer. Braden woke up, glanced at his phone, and froze. His name was everywhere, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one shaping the story. By the time Braden Holt pulled on his robe and stumbled into the kitchen of his hillside mansion, the news cycle had already turned, not toward innovation, not toward politics, but toward a single handwritten card penned by a black girl, in a town he couldn't place on a map. His name was already being dragged through headlines, trending feeds, think pieces. Dear Billionaire wasn't just a hashtag anymore. It had evolved into a digital rebellion, a tidal wave of long-buried grief crashing through the walls of corporate silence. And Braden? He had been asleep through the tremor, but the aftershock hit him square in the chest. His assistant Lydia didn't bother knocking. She barged in, face pale, her phone in one hand, and a printed email thread in the other. "You're everywhere," she said flatly, "but not in the way you want." Braden blinked at her, then at the TV already flashing his face beside a screenshot of the card. "This is insane," he mumbled, almost amused. "It's a child's note. People lose their minds over nothing these days." But Lydia didn't laugh. "No, Braden, they lost their minds because for once, someone said something simple that you've never had to hear." He waved her off and picked up the remote, flipping channels, hoping to find one that didn't carry the same image, the same phrase. But every outlet had caught the scent of the story, and they weren't letting go. It wasn't about the card anymore. It was about everything it stood for. People had flooded Twitter with their own experiences under the hashtag Dear Billionaire turned into Dear CEO, then Dear America. Black employees shared stories of being overlooked in boardrooms. Latinx workers posted screenshots of emails where they'd been addressed by the wrong name. Women shared moments of being the only person of color in entire departments. The phrase "girls like me" echoed louder and louder across posts, stitched into tweets, scrawled across protest signs, even spray-painted onto bus stops in cities that had never heard of Samara Fields until now. A-list celebrities posted stories of being told they were too urban early in their careers. An Oscar-winning actress reposted the card and wrote, "When I was 10 I said the same thing. No one listened. Until now." A popular singer reworked Samara's words into a song hook and performed it during a live stream viewed by 25 million fans. Even politicians weighed in, some in support, others trying to steer the conversation away, only to get swept into the undertow. Still, through all the chaos, one truth remained untouched. Samara hadn't spoken a word since the card went viral. In Macon, the Field's phone hadn't stopped ringing. News vans circled the block like vultures. Letters arrived in bags. Physical, handwritten replies from strangers, some grateful, others intrusive. Arlena tried to keep it all away from Samara, who sat in her room surrounded by dolls that now looked unfamiliar under the weight of expectation. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," she whispered one evening, staring at the ceiling. "I just wanted someone to hear me." Arlena sat beside her on the bed, trying to offer comfort when she herself was unraveling. "They heard you, baby. Louder than you think. But sometimes being heard feels scarier than being ignored." At Samara's school, the atmosphere shifted from quiet condescension to awkward admiration. The very teachers who once interrupted her now overcompensated with loud praise. Her classmates watched her like she might catch fire at any moment. One girl asked if Samara could get her a shout-out from the celebrities reposting her card. Another joked, "Don't forget us when you're rich," and the class laughed, not with kindness but with discomfort. Samara smiled politely, but inside she wondered if speaking up had just built a bigger cage. Meanwhile, Brayden's board was in freefall. An emergency virtual meeting was called. Screens stacked with concerned executives, branding experts, and PR strategists who all shared one collective fear. The brand was bleeding, and the man at the center of it was the wound. "We've weathered bad press before," Brayden argued, arms crossed. "This is emotional noise. People forget." But the head of PR cut in sharply. "This isn't noise. This is reckoning. This girl, this card became a symbol, and right now we're the villain in her story." The legal team warned about class action risks. The diversity department, silent for years under Brayden's leadership, finally spoke up, not to defend, but to distance. For once, Brayden wasn't the most powerful voice in the room. That night, he sat alone in his office, the city glowing beneath him. He replayed the last few days in his head, unable to shake one question: why this card? Why her? He remembered his own childhood. Sterile, elite, cocooned in wealth. He'd never known what it felt like to be dismissed because of his skin. He had known rejection, sure, but it had come with second chances, recommendations, connections. He realized, in a rare moment of clarity, that he had built an empire on systems that never once required him to see children like Samara. And when he finally had the chance, he threw it away. As the hour grew late, Lydia knocked again, this time more gently. She handed him an iPad. No words spoken. On it played a video. A black woman in her 30s, a former Holt intern, speaking into her phone. "I was told my voice was too intense for boardrooms. I stayed silent for years. But when I saw that card, I remembered why I stopped speaking. I remembered how Holt's team laughed when I said I wanted to lead." Her voice cracked. "This card broke my silence." Tears didn't come for Brayden, but something inside him buckled. He had seen his empire through numbers, charts, vision boards. Now it stared back as a mirror. The next morning, Samara walked into school, trying to pretend everything was normal. She passed the bulletin board where her face had been pinned without her permission. A copy of her card blown up beside it. She felt the eyes again, the shifting silence that followed her. When she opened her locker, she found notes stuffed inside. Some were kind, others cruel, but none of it prepared her for what came next. Halfway through second period, the door opened. Her teacher froze. A man in a dark suit stepped in, flanked by two others. All three wore badges. Not police, but corporate. Their shoes gleamed. Their smiles were tight. The classroom fell silent. "We're looking for Samara Fields," the man said calmly. Every student turned toward her, but Samara didn't move. The air thickened as her teacher stuttered, and one thought echoed in her mind louder than any applause or praise. "What do they want from me now?" The morning after the suited men showed up at Samara's school, A storm was already raging in San Francisco. Not outside but inside every floor of Holt Industries' gleaming headquarters. Braden Holt had arrived late to the crisis meeting, his tie untied, eyes tired, as if the trending nightmare had followed him into his sleep. The large conference room was already occupied by the senior PR team, legal counsel, and the head of investor relations, all hovering anxiously over screens displaying headlines that had crossed from social media outrage into news cycle. The hashtag had evolved yet again. Dear Billionaire was now Dear America Too Long, and every mention of it brought fresh waves of accusations, retweets, and demands. Braden took his seat at the head of the glass table, scanning the room that just a week ago had celebrated his leadership. Now the empty stares and forced professionalism said something else. Fear. His PR chief, Monica Levin, didn't waste time on pleasantries. Her voice was clinical, lacking blame, but filling the silence with strategic panic. We need to take action, not just statements, she said. People want authenticity, and right now, they see your silence as indifferent. Indifference, the word hit Braden like an accusation. He opened his mouth about to defend himself. Instinctively, habitually. But before he could construct a rebuttal, Monica continued. We need a public move. A meaningful one. But if we jump straight to a contrite apology without context, people will think it's disingenuous. So here's what we propose. She paused, almost savoring the moment before delivering what she believed was a masterstroke. Invite Samara to Holt Industries. Bring her here. Put her in your office. Show care. Show humanity. Let the cameras capture it. The room exhaled. At least everyone except Braden. Braden's eyes narrowed, not because he loved confrontation, but because he sensed something he rarely felt, panic. And beneath that panic, an instinctive worry that this move, framed as compassion, would feel staged, hollow, like an actor's apology on a commercial break. He thought of Samara, a child thrust into the glare of the world's gaze, her tear-streaked earnestness turned into branding fodder by algorithms and news networks. And now, they were being asked to harvest that authenticity for PR gain. He shook his head. We can't choreograph someone's hurt for views. That's worse than silence. Monica's jaw tightened. Braden, this isn't about PR spin anymore. This is about crisis survival. You need to show up. Legal chimed in. An invitation doesn't obligate anything more. It's a safe way to open dialogue. Braden's stomach twisted. Invite her to a place built on systems that never saw her, never valued her. His voice was low but unshakable. No, not for a staged photo op. Uncomfortable silence settled. No one argued. But as strategy talks turned over slides titled Damage Control, Braden's phone buzzed with alerts. And it wasn't news notifications this time. It was Samara's mother, Arlena, the civil rights attorney, whose calm, precise intelligence was now a force far beyond the courtroom. Braden didn't know what to expect in that call, but whatever it was already splashed across his screen. Messages from reporters claiming Arlena had rejected every offer Holt Industries made today. No public statement, no negotiation, silent. That afternoon, Holt Industries' PR team slipped into panic mode. Press releases were drafted and discarded faster than fingers could type. One version leaned into an apology, another toward understanding systemic issues, and another toward community outreach programs that Braden had never endorsed. Monica felt the walls closing in. Every angle seemed performative, and the world's patience was dissolving like sugar in rain. The unexpected twist landed when a well-known influencer, an activist, Mariah Kane, took over the narrative with one post. This isn't charity. This isn't optics. This is accountability. We don't need your photo ops, Braden. We need structural change. Her post was not just reshared. It was dissected, summarized, broadcast, analyzed. The influencer didn't mention Samara by name, but everyone understood the target. Holt Industries stock dipped again that afternoon. Terms like performative allyship flooded comment sections. People weren't asking for a staged moment. They were demanding systemic acknowledgement of a world that had ignored children like Samara for far too long. In Macon, Arlena watched the global storm unfold. From her living room, while Samara sat across from her, quietly processing her own kind of confusion. Samara didn't understand boardrooms or hashtags. She didn't care about stock prices or headlines. What she felt was the relentless intrusion into a life that had, until recently, been simple. But when Samara asked her mother why people were speaking her words as if they were their own, Arlena realized something essential. Her daughter had bared her heart publicly, not out of awareness of injustices, but out of a child's earnest plea for validation. And now the world had pressed play on that plea, and it was running on screens everywhere. "Why would he want me here?" Samara asked softly, eyes wide with the unfiltered vulnerability that only children possess. Arlena hesitated. Honesty was an obligation now, not an option. Some want to control the narrative. Some want to be seen doing good. But that doesn't mean they understand what you felt when you wrote that card. Samara nodded, looking out the window where leaves skittered in the wind. "I didn't want to make trouble." "You didn't. You asked to be heard," Arlena said. "There's a difference." The next morning, Braden walked into the headquarters with a heaviness he couldn't mask. The air in the halls wasn't just professional. It was uncertain. Employees whispered in corners, checking their phones, quietly sharing screenshots of hashtags with classmates, in unrelated meetings, with partners at home who asked, "Are you okay?" Braden's mind churned with questions. None of them easy, none of them admitting fault. The PR team had advised against addressing Samara directly. "Let the public cool," they said. "Let them forget." But as Braden sat at his desk, he realized the public would only forget if he gave them something easier to latch onto. A new distraction, a new product, a new scandal. But Samara's simple truth hovered like a specter. What if someone like me mattered? He knew plastic smiles and scripted speeches wouldn't cut it. He needed something real, but he didn't know what that looked like. Then his phone buzzed again with a text from an unknown number. It simply read, "Check Instagram." Something about the text unsettled him. No context, no name, just a directive. He tapped the Instagram app and saw it immediately. Samara's face, live on her own account, staring into the camera with a composure he couldn't place in a kid her age. Behind her, the modest walls of her living room, and a bulletin board filled with letters from strangers, wrapped the frame in something intimate, unpolished, real. And she spoke, not a scripted line, not a polished plea, but words that carried the weight of every ignored child in history. Braden watched, heart tightening, as Samara looked straight into the camera, her voice steady, her eyes filled with both hurt and determination. She wasn't there to be managed. She was there to be heard. As the world watched Samara speak, one sentence echoed across millions of screens. And it wasn't what anyone expected. The last thing she said before going offline sparked outrage, empathy, and a demand no one in power was prepared to answer. The morning after Samara went live, silence was no longer an option. Her words, calm, unflinching, devastating in their simplicity, had spread faster than outrage ever could. She hadn't begged. She hadn't cried. She had looked into the camera and said she didn't want to be invited into spaces that were never built for her. And she didn't want apologies written by teams who had never asked her name. She wanted adults to stop pretending that listening was the same as change. And then she logged off. That restraint, that refusal to perform pain, terrified Braden Holt more than any protest ever could. By noon, every major network wanted him. His PR team scrambled, phones ringing off hooks, producers promising fair conversations, executives insisting it was time to get ahead of the narrative. Monica Levin pushed hardest for one interview in particular, a nationally syndicated morning show hosted by Darius Cole, a black journalist known for his calm demeanor and surgical questioning. Darius didn't yell, he didn't posture, he let people talk themselves into the truth. That was precisely why the team hesitated, and precisely why Braden insisted on it. "I can handle one journalist," Braden said, jaw tight. "This ends today." They prepped him for hours. Talking points, redirects, empathy statements stripped of accountability. He was coached to sound reflective without conceding fault, compassionate without admitting harm. When Samara's name came up in rehearsal, he was told to keep it vague, focus on the bigger picture. Monica said, "Don't center the child, center the mission." Braden nodded. He believed he was ready. The studio lights were unforgiving. As Braden sat across from Darius Cole, makeup brushed onto his face. He felt exposed in a way boardrooms had never made him feel. Darius greeted him politely, professionally, with a handshake that carried no warmth and no hostility, just distance, the kind that made powerful men uncomfortable. They went live. At first it felt manageable. Braden spoke about innovation, about responsibility, about how social media amplified emotions faster than facts. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding born from a complex cultural moment. Darius listened, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. That silence emboldened Braden. He began to relax, to feel the familiar rhythm of control returning. Then Darius leaned forward slightly and said Samara's name. The shift was instant. "She's 12, Darius said evenly. "She wrote a Christmas card asking to be seen. Your company discarded it. Why?" Braden smiled. Not cruelly, but dismissively. It was the smile of a man who believed he could intellectualize away a wound. "First, I want to say that I never personally saw the card," he began. "We received thousands of letters. It's unreasonable to Darius cut in, still calm. "But you didn't say you were sorry." Braden blinked. Cameras zoomed in. Millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens. "I am sorry people felt hurt," Braden said carefully. "But intent matters. And I think we need to be careful about projecting adult narratives onto children." The sentence landed like a slap. Social media exploded in real time. Commentators gasped. Samara's mother dropped her phone. Monica Levin closed her eyes in the control room. Darius didn't raise his voice. "Are you suggesting that a black child describing racism is projecting?" Braden shifted in his seat. He hadn't meant it that way, but the words were already out. Alive, irreversible. "I'm saying children are influenced," he replied, digging deeper. "By parents, by activists, by media, and sometimes what?" Darius asked quietly. Braden hesitated for half a second too long. And in that space, instinct overrode strategy. Sometimes narratives like this are used to push agendas that don't reflect reality. The word echoed. Darius leaned back, folded his hands, and let the silence stretch. It was a silence that forced Braden to sit with what he'd just implied, that Samara's lived experience wasn't real until validated by someone like him. "Whose reality?" Darius finally asked. Braden tried to recover. He spoke about data, about diversity initiatives, about how Holt Industries had always valued inclusion. He listed programs, scholarships, statements written by teams paid to make values sound sincere. But the damage was done. The audience wasn't listening anymore. They were watching a man unravel under the weight of his own detachment. Then Darius delivered the final blow. "Samara said last night she didn't want your building or your money," he said. "She wanted to know why powerful men never listen. What would you say to her now?" Directly. The correct answer would have been humility, silence, accountability. Instead, Braden sighed. "I'd tell her that the world is complicated," he said, "and that success requires resilience. Not everything is personal." It was over. The interview ended without applause. The cameras cut. Braden stood, smoothing his jacket, convinced he had weathered the storm. He didn't see the producer staring at him in disbelief. He didn't hear Monica's voice cracking as she spoke into her phone. Within minutes, the clips were everywhere. "Not everything is personal," paired beside Samara's handwriting. "Projecting adult narratives," replayed on a loop. Stock analysts reacted before empathy could even register. Investors pulled out. Algorithms detected risk. Shares plummeted. Holt Industries lost billions in market value before Braden even made it back to his car. In Macon, Samara watched none of it. She sat at her kitchen table, writing in her notebook again. Not a card this time, but a list of things she refused to apologize for. Her mother watched her, pride and fear twisting together in her chest. Across the country, Braden Holt stared at his phone as the numbers fell, finally understanding that the empire he thought was unshakable had been built on a foundation that could not survive truth. By dawn, the gates of Holt Industries were barricaded. Not by police, not by order, but by people. The kind who had gone unseen for too long. The kind Braden Holt had never imagined would stand outside his office tower, holding cardboard signs with hand-drawn stars and glittered snowflakes. Signs that weren't just protest slogans. They were replicas of Samara's card. Some printed, some painted, some burned at the edges in protest. One read, "You ignored her card. Now read ours." The crowd grew by the hour. Students, teachers, parents, former Holt employees, tech workers in hoodies standing beside school custodians in overalls. What made the protest impossible to control was its diversity, not just of race, but of rage. Every face represented a story that had been dismissed, a moment someone had swallowed pain just to survive a space that wasn't built for them. And now they weren't swallowing anymore. Inside the office tower, the tension was a living thing, floor by floor. Security was tightened, but loyalty was unraveling. Sponsors began to vanish. A major venture capital firm withdrew millions in support. A Fortune 500 partner terminated their partnership in a single sentence that said more than any press release ever could: "We do not align with platforms that silence the voices of Black youth." Braden stood by the window of his 34th floor corner office, staring down at the people chanting his name not in praise but in warning. He didn't recognize his own company anymore, and that wasn't because it had changed. It was because it had never been what he thought. It had been a fortress of convenience, of comfortable blindness, of hiring just enough color to check a box, and just enough empathy to look good in brochures. His mind reeled from the interview. The lines he'd delivered, safe on paper, devastating on camera, were now etched into protest banners. "Not everything is personal," one sign quoted. Beneath it, someone had written in red, "It always is when you're the one ignored." The weight was too much for his body to contain, so he left the building through a private exit and drove, not to his second property in Napa or his yacht in Sausalito, but home, to the mansion perched on the cliffside, the place that had always felt like success. Today, it felt like a bunker. But success has no walls high enough to keep out consequence. By the time he pulled into the driveway, reporters had gathered along the front gate, drones hovered, helicopters circled. They weren't just there to cover, they were there to witness collapse. Braden locked the door behind him, stepped inside the vast silence of his house, and something strange happened. His knees buckled. Not from pain, not from fear, but from memory. He sank into the leather couch in his sunken living room, palms against his temples, and for the first time in decades, he let himself remember. He was 8 years old again, standing in the hallway of a private school, wearing shoes he hated and a uniform that chafed. His father, a stockbroker, known for charm and cruelty, had dropped him off with a warning: "No mistakes today. Don't embarrass me in front of the board." Braden had nodded, afraid to speak. But the memory that resurfaced now wasn't about his father. It was about the boy who had stood beside him at the water fountain.
Malik was black, soft-spoken, brilliant with numbers. The only other kid who could match Braden in math class. They had once built a paper rocket together for Science Week. And for a moment, just a moment, Braden had felt something he never admitted to anyone: admiration. But admiration was punished in his world. When his father saw them laughing, he'd said nothing in public. But later, in the car, he made sure Braden understood: "Don't waste your time. That boy won't end up anywhere. Focus on people who matter."
That was the last time Braden spoke to Malik. By the following semester, Malik was gone, transferred, erased. No one talked about it, and Braden never asked. That memory hit him now like a freight train. The unfinished guilt, the complicity he had folded neatly away under layers of ambition. His entire life had been built on ignoring the Maliks of the world. And now, one girl with a glitter-glued card had dragged it all back into the light. The doorbell rang. He jolted upright. It wasn't media. It wasn't a delivery service. A security gate hadn't been triggered. He opened the door cautiously and found no one. Just a single package, wrapped in brown paper. No postage, no label, just his name. And the handwriting, curved, neat, familiar, matched the one he had seen on every television screen for days. Samara's handwriting. His hands shook slightly as he picked it up, the weight of it unnerving. He carried it inside like a live wire, placed it on the kitchen counter, and just stared at it. There was no return address, no explanation, only one word written across the top in red marker: "Remember." Braden slowly peeled the paper open, and what spilled out made him stagger back in disbelief. It wasn't a letter. It was something from his past, something he thought had disappeared forever. Braden stared at the package as if it had whispered his name aloud. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, but everything inside him screamed. His fingers moved without instruction, peeling back the brown paper slowly, almost unwillingly. When the wrapping gave way, revealing the item within, he stopped breathing. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't another card. It was a photograph, faded at the edges, creased through the middle, but unmistakably preserved by someone who had cared enough to keep it safe. He reached for it with trembling hands, heart racing. The moment his eyes landed on it, time buckled. There he was, 12-year-old Braden Holt, in a stiff private school blazer, expression flat, posture stiff, and next to him stood Malik, taller than Braden, even back then, with deep brown skin, a shy smile, and eyes that held a quiet defiance. The backdrop was familiar: the school courtyard with its marble arch, the tree they used to sit under during recess. Braden hadn't seen that image in over 30 years. He had forgotten its existence, or maybe deliberately erased it. But here it was. Proof. A record. A challenge. He leaned closer. Written on the back of the photo in the same red ink as the word on the wrapping paper was a date, April 1989. And one line beneath it, "You forgot him. We didn't." Braden dropped into the kitchen chair, legs weak, and stared at the photo for a long time. The moment it captured came flooding back like a film reel unspooling inside his head. Malik had been his friend. No, more than that. He had been Braden's only true friend during those difficult, lonely years. The boy who taught him to play chess. The boy who explained the jokes Braden pretended to understand. The one person who never made him feel like a disappointment. Until he vanished. No explanation. No warning. One day he was there. The next, gone. The teachers had brushed it off. Transferred, they said. Family moved. Braden had accepted it. Maybe even welcomed it. Because deep down, Malik's presence had threatened something Braden wasn't ready to face. The way their friendship made him question the rules he was being raised to obey. The unspoken codes of proximity and power. His father's words had lingered like an invisible leash. "They're not like us, Braden. Don't confuse charity for friendship." So he hadn't asked. He hadn't searched. He hadn't even said goodbye. But someone remembered. And someone had delivered this photograph not as nostalgia, but as indictment. Across town in the warmth of a modest living room in Macon, Arlena Fields sat at her desk surrounded by legal files and articles she had been archiving about Holt Industries for weeks. Her mind was already swimming in evidence, whistleblower tips, and half-buried reports of discrimination hidden in quarterly reviews. But when she got a text from a former classmate, a grainy image followed by the message, "Isn't this your cousin Malik?" Her breath caught in her throat. She enlarged the photo on her phone. Her eyes instantly locked on the face of the black boy standing beside young Braden. She hadn't seen Malik's face since she was a teenager, but it was him. No doubt. Her voice shook as she called out, "Samara. Baby, come here." Samara padded into the room. Hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands. "What's wrong?" Arlena turned the phone around and showed her the photo. "Do you recognize this man?" Samara squinted. "That's the man from the protest sign, right? But he's younger?" Arlena nodded. "That's your cousin Malik, my uncle's son." Samara blinked, confused. "The cousin who disappeared." Arlena nodded again, slower this time. "He was sent away. There was talk in the family that something happened at his school, something with one of the white boys. He never talked about it, just shut down and left. We lost touch." She paused, brows furrowed. "But I never knew it was this Braden Holt." She turned the image over. "Read the handwriting." Her stomach flipped. Samara sat slowly beside her, reading every emotion on her mother's face. "Is he alive?" "I don't know," Arlena whispered. "He disappeared from our lives like he was never meant to be remembered." Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a billionaire and a Christmas card. It was personal. Back at the mansion, Braden began pacing. Who sent the photo? Who remembered? Was it Malik? The idea made his throat tighten. If Malik was alive, if he had carried this silence for all these years, then Braden wasn't just facing a public reckoning. He was staring down the consequences of personal betrayal. And it wasn't just a betrayal of one friend. It was a template. A pattern. Samara. Malik. How many others had he chosen not to see because it was easier than feeling what seeing them demanded? He sat down and called Lydia. When she answered, her voice was cautious. "Braden, are you okay?" "No," he said flatly. "I got a package. A photo from my past." There was a pause. "Do you know who sent it?" "I think so," he said slowly. "But I need to be sure." Lydia's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then you're going to need to face the people who remember who you were before you became this man." Braden hung up and stared at the photo again, his reflection faintly visible in the glass of the frame he had placed it in. For the first time in decades, he wasn't afraid of public failure. He was afraid of memory. That night, Arlena dug through a shoebox of old family photos and found one of Malik from a summer cookout in 1989. On the back, written in neat blue ink, were two names, Malik Fields and Braden Holt. Arlena Fields didn't sleep that night. The photo she'd found, the one with Malik and Braden smiling beside a grill at a 1989 cookout, sat in front of her like evidence in a trial she hadn't known she was preparing for decades. Her cousin Malik had always been the quiet genius in the family, the kind who took apart radios and built them again better before middle school. He had once said he wanted to build something that would help the world see the brilliance in black children, something that would force people to look beyond their fear and their assumptions. but he vanished before that vision could take shape. Now the man standing at the center of a global controversy had once stood beside him, smiling like nothing would ever separate them. That photo changed everything. Arlena turned to her bookshelf. Not for law books this time, but for a black binder she hadn't touched in years. It was her personal archive of suppressed stories, patents that had gone missing, lawsuits that were quietly settled and buried, NDAs used like silencers. Over the years she'd represented too many black engineers and tech developers who had their ideas acquired by white-owned firms, only to be let go shortly after. She'd seen dreams crushed in press releases that never mentioned the original creator. Now, with Braden's photo in one hand and her cousin's legacy in the other, she began to wonder, what if Braden's empire wasn't just built on ideas, but on stolen ones? She reached out to colleagues, to tech watchdog groups, to archives buried in corners of the internet. Only whistleblowers and failed inventors still haunted. It didn't take long to find a thread. In the late 1990s, during Braden's first startup phase, there had been a burst of innovation in facial recognition software. A black inventor named Elijah Pratt had developed an algorithm that corrected racial bias in early camera technology. His demo had gone viral in tech circles. Weeks later, Braden's team announced their own version, eerily similar. Pratt sued. The case was quietly settled. The NDA was ironclad. Arlena kept pulling. There were more. A black woman named Teresa Langley had created a voice detection program that recognized tonal shifts in regional dialects, especially in African American vernacular English, a breakthrough for equity in education apps. Months later, Holt Industries released a flagship tool with the same function. Langley disappeared from public view. There was a pattern, and the silence wasn't accidental. Arlena's legal mind worked furiously. With enough documented cases, she could build something massive, not a complaint, a class action lawsuit, one that could tear Braden's empire apart from the foundation up. She wasn't chasing a media win. She was hunting justice, the kind that people like Braden had never been forced to face. Samara watched her mother quietly that week, noticing the difference. Her mother was no longer just reacting to headlines. She was building something of her own. The way she moved between calls, jotted notes, highlighted phrases. It reminded Samara of something a teacher once said about hurricanes. They don't start strong, the teacher had said. They build over warm water quietly, until they can't be ignored. That was her mother now, building power under pressure. Still, something gnawed at Arlena. Proof alone wouldn't break Braden. Not unless it came from the inside. She needed someone who had been in those rooms. Someone who had seen the gears turn and the silence bought. That someone found her first. The email arrived in the middle of the night. Subject line: "You're looking in the right place. Let's finish what he started." The message was brief. No name, just a burner email. And a single line. He built it on the backs of better men. Attached were documents. Dozens of them. Internal memos. Meeting transcripts. Notes from a compliance officer, who had resigned abruptly years ago. In one chilling memo, Braden was quoted in a meeting saying, "We don't owe them credit if they didn't build it right." The "them" wasn't clarified, but the next line read, "Black contributors should remain in support roles. We own the platform, not the identity politics." Arlena sat frozen for a long moment. It wasn't just about bias. It was theft. Intentional, systemic, documented. She printed everything. As she assembled the binder, she found something at the very bottom of the email. A scanned signature. The original non-disclosure agreement for Elijah Pratt's case. And beside it, a note in handwriting she recognized instantly from 1,000 social posts and a single Christmas card. "He erased my uncle, but not my memory." Samara had never mentioned it, had never said she'd reached out. But now Arlena knew. The whistleblower was Malik's son. Samara had found him first. Just as Arlena began drafting the lawsuit, her phone buzzed, an encrypted voicemail from an anonymous number. "If you release those documents, you won't just destroy Braden. You'll end careers. You'll break things that don't come back." While legal documents were piling up in a binder thick with buried truths, and Arlena was being warned off by anonymous messages with veiled threats, Samara remained suspended in a strange, still moment. Not quite a child anymore, not yet a public figure. She moved through her days like someone walking underwater. Everything around her too loud, too fast, too watched. She no longer rode the bus to school. Her principal, suddenly more invested in her safety than ever before, insisted on private transport. The hallway whispers had shifted too. Once cruel, now filled with nervous admiration. like her classmates were afraid to upset her in case the world noticed. Teachers paused longer when calling on her, like her answers mattered more. Even strangers stared too long. And still no one asked her how she was really doing. Because outside her house, she wasn't just Samara anymore. She was a story, a symbol, an idea people had pinned their rage, hope and headlines to. The letters came first. At first, just a few neatly folded envelopes postmarked from schools around the country. Then came the boxes. Then crates. Arlena had to clear out a spare bedroom just to store the mail. Some were written in crayon, others in careful cursive. Some typed by parents who admitted they didn't know how else to show their kids that they mattered. Every envelope seemed to hum with emotion. One girl from Alabama wrote, "I didn't know people could say that stuff out loud." A boy from Detroit said, "When I read your card, I stopped hiding my sketchbook." A fifth grader from Oregon included a photo of herself holding up a sign, "I matter too." Samara read every one she could, sometimes for hours after school, cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the weight of voices that had found a mirror in hers. And slowly, something shifted in her. She didn't feel brave, she didn't feel like a leader, but she did feel responsible. One night she turned to her mother and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Arlena looked up from a thick folder of scanned court documents, momentarily caught off guard by the softness in Samara's voice. "Why would you ask that?" Samara hugged her knees to her chest. "Because people keep thanking me like I fixed something. But nothing feels fixed. And now everyone's mad. I didn't want to break anything." Arlena crossed the room and knelt in front of her daughter. Her voice was calm but fierce. "You didn't break anything. You revealed what was already broken. That's what truth does. It cracks silence open." Samara nodded, slowly. But the weight didn't lift. It only settled differently. The media attention only grew. They called her the voice of a generation, a title plastered across news tickers and thumbnails with her face beside headlines she never wrote. She wasn't invited to parties or parks. She was invited to speak at conferences. Adults wanted her to inspire their panels. Brands wanted to partner. Magazines requested interviews. She turned down nearly everything. She still just wanted to be heard, not sold. One interview did slip through, though. A virtual segment on a national morning show hosted by a bright-eyed anchor who asked all the wrong questions. "Did you ever think your card would make such a positive impact on corporate culture?" they asked with a smile. Samara blinked. "I wasn't trying to help a company," she said flatly. "I was asking why people like me get ignored." The silence that followed wasn't edited out. It aired exactly as it happened. The clip went viral. Again. And this time, even the adults in the room started to realize that Samara wasn't playing along with the script. Braden noticed. Watching from the depths of his office, drowning in lawsuits and spiraling PR campaigns, he saw what the world was beginning to realize. Samara wasn't a passing trend. She wasn't a mascot. She was a reckoning. And every time she spoke plainly, the ground shifted beneath him again. Which is why the next move wasn't surprising in its cruelty, only in its timing. On a Wednesday afternoon, Arlena received an official notice from Holt Industries' legal team. Defamation. The charges were sweeping, technical, and dressed in the usual corporate jargon. They accused her of damaging Braden Holt's public standing, of leaking confidential memos, of willful attempts to disrupt the company's operational integrity through coordinated public slander. Samara found the envelope first. She handed it to her mother without a word. Arlena read it once, then again, each paragraph confirming what she already feared. This wasn't just retaliation, it was intimidation. A strategic attempt to discredit her before she could formally file her lawsuit against Braden. But Arlena didn't blink. She placed the letter on the kitchen table and looked at her daughter. "They're trying to scare us." Samara asked, "Is it working?" Arlena smiled faintly. "No. But it means we're getting closer to something they don't want the world to see." The next morning, the media was flooded with news of Holt Industries suing the mother of the very girl whose card started it all. Public backlash was instant, with hashtags like "You sue her, you prove her right" trending within hours. Activists called it a form of legal bullying. Celebrities denounced it. Protesters returned to the gates of Holt HQ, this time holding signs that read, "You couldn't silence her card, so now you're suing her voice." But Braden didn't flinch. He had crossed the line into survival mode, and survival for men like him often meant destroying before being destroyed. A court date was set. The media circus roared, and in the middle of it all, Samara sat back at the same kitchen table, where she wrote that first card, her fingers tracing the outline of an envelope. Not a new letter. An old one. One she hadn't sent. A draft she never mailed. The card that was supposed to go to her father. That night, as she quietly tucked the unsent card away, Arlena's phone rang. The whistleblower was ready to speak on record, but only if Samara would be the one to ask the questions. The courtroom wasn't large, but the moment Arlena and Samara walked in, it felt cavernous, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. It was day one of Holt Industries' VOR, Arlena Fields, a defamation suit that had become national news before opening arguments were even heard. Every seat was taken. Reporters packed into corners, their phones ready to fire off headlines with every breath. Courtroom sketch artists moved their pencils with frenetic intensity. The judge's robe hadn't even fully settled onto his shoulders when a producer from a major network whispered into her mic, "And we're live." Samara sat quietly beside her mother at the defense table, her posture straight, her hands folded. She wore no jewelry, no expensive outfit, just the same lavender sweater she'd had on the day her original card went viral. She wasn't dressed for performance. She was dressed for truth. On the opposite side, Braden sat flanked by 3 lawyers in dark corporate armor, suits cut to silence and strategy. He looked composed, but not relaxed. If the last few weeks had aged him, he had done a decent job hiding it. Still, his eyes moved constantly, never resting, like someone who knew the walls were finally whispering secrets back. Opening statements began like a slow boil. Holt Industries' lead attorney, Vincent Crawley, was theatrical without being loud. Every sentence he delivered was precision sharpened. What we have here is a coordinated campaign of targeted defamation, driven not by justice but by a thirst for relevance. He called Arlena an ambitious opportunist, and Samara's card a sentimental Trojan horse used to attack a reputable public figure. He spoke to the jury with the calm confidence of a man who had built his career defending corporations from the consequences of their power. But Arlena didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she stood without a single note in her hand. She addressed the jury like a mother, like a lawyer, like a woman who had swallowed too many truths for too many years. "I didn't come here to play hero," she began. "I came here because my daughter's truth was never meant to be weaponized. Because for decades, men like Mr. Holt have built entire empires by erasing people like Malik Fields, Teresa Langley, Elijah Pratt, and now that the truth has clawed its way into daylight, they want to call it slander." Her voice didn't tremble. It resonated. And in that courtroom, it was the only thing louder than silence. The next 3 days unraveled like a courtroom drama too raw for fiction. Crowley brought in executives who testified that Arlena had manufactured a narrative. They showed clips from Samara's livestream, dissected her words, played them back with tone analysis to paint them as rehearsed and emotionally manipulative. They brought in expert witnesses who discussed social media influence, trying to frame Samara as a carefully constructed brand, a preteen propaganda machine. But the moment Arlena began her cross-examinations, the narrative bent. She produced internal emails, redacted but damning, where Braden's own senior staff discussed leveraging the optics of the child, before withdrawing, when Arlena refused a staged PR visit. She revealed the NDA tied to Malik's father, linking it to Holt Industries' AI patent. She presented timelines showing how multiple black innovators had been silenced, bought out, and in one case blacklisted from industry jobs after filing complaints. When she called Teresa Langley to the stand, the courtroom held its breath. Teresa walked in with quiet grace, holding a folder tight to her chest. She hadn't spoken publicly in years. The moment she sat down, Braden looked away. "I was told my voice was too niche," Teresa began, looking straight at the jury, "that people wouldn't connect with the language patterns I coded for. So they used my design and erased my name." Arlena placed the original prototype in front of her. Teresa blinked. "Where did you find this?" Arlena answered, "Where they tried to bury it." The judge called for order twice that day. Tensions flared. At one point Crawley objected so often it bordered on farce. But the judge let the testimonies unfold. The truth was becoming impossible to dam up. Samara sat through every second, absorbing every line like she had absorbed years of being invisible. No tears, no outbursts, just presence. And then came the turn no one had expected, not even Arlena. Late on the 4th day, during a procedural recess, an intern from the court's evidence room handed Arlena a flash drive, mumbling that it had just been submitted by a sealed source. Arlena looked at the clerk. "Is this admissible?"
The clerk nodded. "Filed under whistleblower protection. Judge approved it 10 minutes ago."
Back inside the courtroom, Arlena waited until the next opening to address the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice sharper now. We've received newly submitted evidence. A recording. Audio only. Time-stamped 3 years ago. We believe the voice on the file is Mr. Holtz. Braden visibly froze. Crowley leapt to his feet. Your Honor, we have no idea. The judge raised a hand. I'll allow it. The courtroom darkened slightly as the audio file played. It began mid-conversation. Low static in the background. Then came Braden's unmistakable voice. Look, if we start giving credit to every diversity hire with a decent prototype, we'll be out of funding before Q2. This isn't charity, it's business. And business is about perception. We let them feel seen. That's enough. A second voice, one of his executives, tried to reply, but Braden cut in again. They're good at building feelings, not systems. We sell the story, not the truth. The file ended. No one moved. Even the judge was still. Crowley tried to object, but the words came too late. The jury stared at Braden as if seeing him for the first time. Reporters had already left the courtroom and were sprinting outside to upload headlines. Samara looked at her mother. That was real? Arlena nodded, jaw clenched. Every damn word. Braden stood slowly, his face pale. He didn't speak. He didn't deny. Just then, a bailiff handed the judge a second envelope, hand-delivered, no return address, containing a second flash drive. It was marked only with the word confession. The courtroom had already been holding its breath, but when the judge nodded and allowed the second flash drive to be entered into evidence, the air seemed to thin completely. Even the low murmur of reporters typing slowed, as if instinct warned them that whatever came next would redraw the story permanently. Braden Holtz sat rigid, eyes fixed on the table in front of him, as though refusing to look up might undo what was about to happen. His lawyers whispered urgently, but their words bounced off him. He already knew. Somewhere deep, buried beneath years of arrogance and control, he knew exactly what was on that drive. The judge cleared his throat. Play the recording. The audio crackled to life, clearer than the last. This wasn't a boardroom meeting. There was laughter in the background, glasses clinking, a relaxed, unguarded atmosphere, the kind where powerful men said the things they never put in emails. Braden's voice came through first, unmistakable and unfiltered. You should have seen the card, he said, amusement thick in his tone. All glitter and guilt, like I'm supposed to cry because a black kid wrote me a Christmas wish. A sharp inhale rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the recording chuckled. Braden continued, more animated now. They know how to pull heartstrings. That's their whole thing. Turn pain into currency. We just have to make sure we're the ones cashing the check. Another voice asked something indistinct, and Braden laughed again, louder this time. Look, communities like that are great for branding. You throw them a scholarship, put a face on a billboard, and suddenly you're a hero. Meanwhile, the real money stays right where it belongs. The word belongs landed like a verdict. Samara's hands clenched in her lap. She stared straight ahead, not at the speakers, not at Braden, but at the invisible weight of what was being exposed. This wasn't abstract racism. This wasn't coded language or plausible deniability. This was cruelty spoken comfortably, casually, without fear of consequence. It was the sound of someone who had never believed he would be held accountable. The tape went on. You know what the best part is? Braden said. They think being seen means being valued. They don't realize visibility is just another tool. Let them feel important. We still own the platform. When the audio stopped, it wasn't silence that followed. It was collapse. One juror covered her mouth. Another stared at Braden with something close to disbelief. The judge removed his glasses, slowly, as if trying to recalibrate his vision. Even Crowley, Braden's lead attorney, looked like he'd been punched in the chest. This wasn't damage control territory. This was annihilation. Outside the courtroom, the world was already burning. News alerts detonated across phones. Headlines updated in real time. Leaked tape reveals Holt mocked black child. Billionaire caught laughing about exploding communities. No denial from Holt camp. Within minutes, sponsors released statements distancing themselves. Within an hour, they pulled out entirely. University partnerships dissolved. Charities returned donations. Holt Industries stock didn't just dip. It plunged, triggering automated halts as analysts scrambled to understand how an empire could unravel so fast. Braden didn't speak. He couldn't. There was no spin left. No framing. No apology capable of reaching the crater that tape had carved. Everything he'd built, the narrative of the self-made visionary, the philanthropist, the misunderstood leader, collapsed under the weight of his own voice. Orlena felt it then. Not triumph, Not relief, but grief. Grief for every client she'd represented too late. For Malik. For Samara. For the children who had learned early that their pain was profitable to someone else. The judge recessed the court early that day. He didn't need more testimony. The truth had spoken for itself. Outside, Raiden was ushered through a side exit. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions that no longer needed answers. He didn't raise his head. For the first time in his life, invisibility felt like punishment. That evening, Samara sat quietly in her room, the noise of the world muffled behind closed doors. Her phone buzzed non-stop, but she didn't look. She pulled out her notebook instead, the same one where she'd first drafted the Christmas card, and wrote a single sentence. They heard me when it was too late for him. Orlena knocked softly before entering. Her face was tired, lines deeper than Samara remembered. You okay? She asked. Samara nodded slowly. I don't feel happy. That means you're still human, Arlena replied. They sat together in silence until Arlena's phone rang again. This time she answered. Her expression changed almost immediately. Yes, she said cautiously. I'm listening. Samara watched her mother's posture stiffen, her free hand pressing against the table. When the call ended, Arlena didn't speak right away. She stared out the window, gathering herself. Who was it? Samara asked. Arlena turned to her. A consortium. Tech, media, finance. They want to make this right. Samara frowned. What does that mean? It means, Arlena said carefully, they're offering you $1 billion trust. Scholarships, foundations in your name, complete control over where the money goes. Samara's eyes widened, not with excitement, but suspicion. Why? Arlena swallowed. Because they want the story to end. And they want you to be the ending. She hesitated, then added the part that made her voice tighten. There's a condition. Samara's stomach dropped. What kind of condition? Arlena met her gaze. Silence. No more interviews. No more testimony. No speaking about Holt. Ever. The room felt suddenly very small. Samara looked down at her notebook, then back up at her mother, and asked a question that would decide everything. If I say yes, who does that protect? The email didn't come through Braden's people. It came from the rival camp. Embercore, one of the few tech giants not already burned by proximity to Holt Industries, had been watching the entire storm from the shadows. Unlike Braden, they hadn't spoken. They hadn't defended or distanced. They'd waited. And when the time felt right, when Braden's name was synonymous with rot and Samara's with light, they struck. The offer was sleek. A PDF with soft branding and sharp language, like a resume soaked in money. Samara would be awarded a full scholarship package through Embercore's new Youth Equity Initiative. Arlena would be named Vice President of Ethics and Innovation, with a compensation package that eclipsed anything she'd ever dreamed. A 7-figure settlement would be paid out in acknowledgement of the hardship caused by institutional failings. And the centerpiece, Embercore would launch a foundation in Samara's name, focusing on marginalized youth in tech. But buried 4 paragraphs deep, past the language of empowerment, the subtle applause disguised as legal language, was the condition. Full withdrawal of all claims. Permanent NDA. No public commentary on Holt Industries ever again. When Arlena read it, her breath caught in her throat. It was what she feared might come but hadn't wanted to name aloud. It wasn't just a golden parachute. It was a muzzle, gold-lined and velvet-wrapped. She didn't speak of it immediately. She saved the file, closed the laptop, and tried to pretend for a few hours that silence hadn't just been priced, that Samara found out. She always did. That evening, over dinner, Samara asked softly, "Is someone offering to pay us to shut up?" Arlena looked up, surprised. "Where'd you hear that?" Samara shrugged. "You closed your laptop the way people close it when something hurts." Arlena sighed, running her fingers through her hair. They offered a future, one that wouldn't require fighting anymore. Samara put her fork down. "And all we have to do is pretend nothing happened." They didn't say it like that, but that's what they meant. Arlena nodded. Slowly. Heavily. Yes. The next few days blurred. Conversations layered over each other. Arlena's sister called and said, maybe this was a blessing, that Samara could get out from under the microscope and just be a kid again. A cousin argued that taking the deal didn't mean compromising. It meant surviving smarter. Even Malik's son, the whistleblower, who had sparked the turning point, texted Arlena, "Sometimes silence funds the next fight. Think about it." The house became divided in whispers. The same voices that once rallied behind Samara now weighed strategy like stock portfolios. But Samara stayed quiet. She wasn't angry. She was processing. Because the truth was, part of her was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. A deeper exhaustion. The kind that comes from being made into something you didn't ask to be. She missed being a shadow. She missed walking through the world without being Samara Fields, the girl with the card. She missed not having to wonder if every adult in the room saw her as a symbol or a sacrifice. And still, she couldn't forget. The kids' letters. The voice on the tape. Malik's erased brilliance. Braden's laugh. The billionaire who once ignored her card was gone now. Vanished from media. Hiding in private quarters, no longer shaping headlines but still shaping power. Holt Industries hadn't folded. Its shares had crashed, but its tech still ran in school software, city databases, government tools. A fallen king is still dangerous if the kingdom doesn't change. That's what Embercore didn't understand. They didn't want justice. They wanted quiet. So Samara stayed up one night and opened her notebook again. Not the digital version, not a pristine draft, her notebook. The same one with the card that started it all. And in black ink, she wrote her final card. It wasn't addressed to a billionaire this time. It wasn't asking for kindness. It wasn't glittered or folded or sugar-coated for comfort. It was sharp, specific, a refusal dressed as truth. She didn't show her mother. She didn't ask for permission. She posted it on her Instagram with the caption, "This card isn't for Christmas. It's for every kid who's told to take the money and smile." The image of the handwritten card spread faster than anything she had ever posted. It read, "Dear whoever thinks I'm for sale. You can't buy silence with scholarships. You can't fix what you erased with job offers. I'm not here to be your brand. I'm here because I was ignored. And I'm staying because others still are." Samara Fields. As the post crossed 1 million shares in less than an hour, Samara's phone buzzed with a direct message from a verified account. And it was from Braden Holt. The ink hadn't even dried on Samara's final card before the world began to shift again. Her handwriting, posted as a photo in soft lamplight, pulsed with the weight of generational truth. Not polished for corporate branding, not softened for comfort, but written with the raw edge of a 12-year-old who had seen too much and been expected to carry too many expectations. This card wasn't warm or whimsical. It didn't dance around injustice. It confronted it plainly, loudly, and without apology. Samara hadn't written to Braden. She had written to everyone. And the internet listened. Within hours, her post was picked up by activist accounts across 5 continents. Educators in Brazil translated it for their students. Teenagers in South Africa reshared it with messages about their own schools. A protest group in Berlin printed the text across a giant canvas and hung it from a tech conference center with a sign that read, "She's 12. What's your excuse?" But the card didn't just travel as text. It morphed into murals. Graffiti in London scrawled the line, "I'm not here to be your brand." A spoken word artist in Harlem adapted the words into a poem performed at a youth justice rally. In Tokyo, a collective of young coders flashed the final phrase, "I'm staying because others still are," across a hackathon livestream attended by 10 million viewers. And the momentum didn't stop. Samara's voice, once ignored in a Christmas card tossed aside by a billionaire, had now become a chorus. Even heads of state responded. The Prime Minister of Canada referenced her card in a policy speech on education reform. The UN Human Rights Commission released a statement acknowledging systemic erasure of young black voices in digital equity discussions, directly citing Samara's manifesto. Major media outlets tried to label it a movement, but Samara refused interviews. She posted once more, a simple line, "This isn't a movement. It's what I needed to say when no one was listening." Her refusal to capitalize on the moment became its own form of power. She wasn't building a brand. She was building a boundary, a public stand that didn't ask for understanding, only recognition. Inside their small Georgia home, the doorbell rang more than ever. Journalists, organizers, educators. Arlena shielded Samara as best she could, turning down offers with polite but firm rejection. "I want her voice to be free," Arlena said in one of the few statements she gave. Not commodified, but no one expected what would happen next. One evening, as Samara sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, organizing the new wave of letters being sent by children from around the world, her phone buzzed with a notification she almost ignored. It was a direct message. Verified account. Braden Holt. Her breath caught. For a moment the screen didn't feel real. The man who had become the symbol of calculated cruelty, the name tied to mockery, exploitation, and profit. The man who vanished after the courtroom tapes detonated his empire. No caption, no words, just a link. Samara hesitated, not out of fear, but out of principle. He hadn't earned her attention. He hadn't earned her trust, but she was too aware of the moment, not to click. The link opened to a video, not produced, not polished. A phone-recorded clip, shaky, low-res. Braden Holt stood in front of a familiar building, the rusted gates of an old elementary school in what appeared to be a forgotten neighborhood, the kind news cameras only show during crises. It was his childhood school, the place from the photo, the place where Malik had once stood beside him. Braden looked nothing like the man who'd once graced Forbes covers. No designer suit, no lighting, just shadows under his eyes, and a crack in his voice that didn't sound rehearsed. He looked into the camera and said, "This is where I stopped listening." He took a long breath. "I came here today because this school, this street, is where I first learned to pretend I didn't see what I saw. I had a friend here. He was smarter than me, better, and I let him disappear because I was told to focus on people who mattered." He swallowed hard, blinking quickly. "I didn't lose my company. I lost my soul a long time before that. I just didn't know it yet." He paused, then added, "Samara, I don't deserve your forgiveness. This video isn't for redemption. It's just me, finally saying something without a script." The video ended there. No fade out, no call to action. But it spread like fire. Some said it was too late. Others called it calculated. But millions more didn't debate it. They simply watched a man unmasked, not by scandal, but by a child's courage. Samara didn't repost the video. She didn't comment. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any reply. The next morning, Samara received a call from the Smithsonian. They wanted to frame her card in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, but it wasn't the only item they requested. They also wanted the photo of Braden and Malik. Braden's video reverberated through every layer of the public consciousness, like an unexpected tremor. He didn't beg. He didn't defend. He didn't hide behind legal statements or media-trained emotion. He simply stood on cracked pavement outside the school he tried to forget, and said what no one expected. "I let silence shape me into something unrecognizable." For a brief moment, the noise that had swirled around his name, the hashtags, the anger, the fury, paused. Some viewers cried, some nodded in silence, but others, louder and less forgiving, called it a strategy, too polished to be pain, a PR stunt in poverty's clothing. He found a way to center himself again. The divide didn't surprise Samara. What stunned her was the way it made her feel. Nothing. No rage. No sympathy. Just a strange, hollow detachment. She watched the clip once. Then never again. She didn't repost it. She didn't speak about it publicly. And when a major news anchor asked her for a reaction, she responded with a single sentence. Some words don't need answers. But others didn't stop talking. And one of those voices came from higher than anyone expected. An invitation arrived 2 days later, formally delivered by courier, embossed with gold lettering. The United Nations. Geneva, a global summit on technology and ethics. Samara was invited to speak on behalf of youth voices impacted by digital systems of inequality. It wasn't a school assembly. It wasn't a classroom essay. It was the world stage. Arlena sat across from her daughter as they read the letter in silence. Samara looked up first. "Is this because I told the truth? Or because I became viral?" Arlena didn't answer right away. "Maybe both." Samara's voice dropped. "Then, how do I know they care about me? Not the headlines." Arlena exhaled. "You don't. That's why you go in knowing who you are before anyone tries to define you." Still, something in Samara twisted. She had spent months fighting to be heard, and now that she had the world's attention, she wasn't sure she wanted it anymore. Or worse, she wasn't sure it was safe to have it. She had watched Braden's empire unravel, not from failure, but from too much exposure. She wasn't afraid of power. She was afraid of what power demanded in return. In the days leading up to the trip, letters continued to flood the house. Children still wrote. Teenagers still shared. One message, handwritten by a girl in Pakistan, read, "You made me believe that our voices don't need permission." Samara folded it carefully, placed it in her journal, and said yes to Geneva. The flight was long. Press followed them through the terminal, but UN staffers ensured privacy once they boarded. Samara sat by the window, Arlena beside her. Neither spoke much. The hum of the engine felt like a needed silence, one without interpretation or expectation. Then Samara opened her seat pocket. A white envelope rested inside. No logo, no stamp, just her name, written in handwriting she now recognized all too well. Braden Holt. Orlena noticed the change in her daughter's expression immediately. "What is it?" Samara turned the envelope over slowly. "He wrote me." Orlena's mouth set into a hard line. "You don't owe him your eyes." "I know," Samara said quietly, but her fingers had already begun peeling it open. The letter inside was short. No branding, no signature. Just 5 lines. "If this is manipulation, I'm still learning. If this is redemption, I know I don't deserve it. But if you read this, it means I trusted you with my last honest thought. I never knew a card could break the system I built. Now I hope it breaks me too." Samara read it once. Then again. And again. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an excuse. It was a fracture. The kind people rarely show, unless they know they've already lost everything. She folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope, without a word. Arlena's voice was soft but firm. "He's still controlling the narrative." Samara nodded slowly. "Or maybe he finally doesn't know how to." That night, after landing in Geneva, Samara sat alone on the hotel balcony, overlooking the city's glistening lights. Her speech for the summit sat untouched on her tablet. Every advisor, every planner had sent draft after draft, polished statements packed with impact and decorum, but none of them felt like her voice. So she opened her notebook again and began writing. Not for them, for her. She didn't write about Holt, or systems, or apologies. She wrote about trust, what it costs, what it breaks, what it rebuilds when it's real. The next morning, the UN auditorium filled with diplomats, journalists, and delegates. The lights were sharp, the cameras poised. The room quieted as Samara stepped up to the podium. Hands steady, eyes clear. As she began her speech, someone in the front row stood, a man no one expected to see again, Braden Holt. No press, no entourage, just him holding Samara's original Christmas card in his hands. The auditorium held its breath. Samara stood at the podium, backlit by the global symbol of unity. Rows of flags from every continent waving behind her like silent witnesses. The spotlights cast a soft halo around her, but she didn't feel like a beacon. She felt like a bridge between what was broken and what could be rebuilt. Her notes were untouched. Her speech had already been rewritten by something more important than language. Lived experience. Then, from the front row, movement. Braden Holt stood. The man who had vanished in disgrace. The architect of a silent machine. The billionaire who once scoffed at her glitter-covered card, now stood alone, dressed simply. No press badge, no entourage. He held nothing but a single worn envelope, her original card, folded gently in his hands. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Security hesitated, but didn't intervene. It wasn't a protest. It was presence. Samara didn't flinch. She nodded once, acknowledging him, not as validation, but as context. Then she began. "I was told a card couldn't change anything," she said, voice calm. "Sure, that no one would listen to a black girl from Georgia who asked to matter." A pause. The room leaned in. "But the silence I grew up with was never quiet. It was loud in classrooms where I wasn't called on. Loud in stores where I was followed. Loud in the way tech watched people like me, but never reflected us." She stepped away from the microphone and walked slowly toward the edge of the stage. "We keep asking why these systems are broken, but they're not. They were built exactly this way to benefit some and bypass others." The screens behind her shifted to images, not of her, but of other kids' cards. Real ones, from children across the world. Photos of their handwritten words, their sketches, their dreams. The visual wall behind her became a living testimony. Samara turned back to the audience. "I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to insist." A murmur of approval. "I'm here to propose a platform built by the people usually left out of platforms." She introduced Project Equikide, a youth-led tech incubator, with one simple rule: no one could lead it unless they had once been erased. A space funded not by pity, but by redistribution. Designed not for visibility, but for ownership. Samara didn't just demand space. She built a blueprint for one. As she closed, she didn't thank the room. She thanked the children whose letters lined her bedroom floor back home. "They taught me what grown-ups forgot, that you don't need to be loud to be heard. You just need to speak truth." The room rose in a standing ovation, not out of politeness, but urgency. Brayden remained standing, silent, still holding the card. Later during the break, he approached her quietly. No cameras followed. Arlena stood nearby, watching closely, ready to step in. But Brayden stopped a respectful distance away. He offered a sealed letter. I don't expect conversation. Just this. Samara took it, nodded once, said nothing. Back in her hotel room, she opened the letter. Brayden's handwriting was neater than expected, but the words inside shook her more than his voice ever had. Samara, I spent my life building a tower on silence. I called it innovation, but it was convenience. I ignored voices that scared me because they challenged everything I thought I earned. Your card broke through because it was the only thing honest enough to make me look. I've stepped down. Holt Industries, as it was, ends this month. The entire leadership team has resigned. The company will relaunch under a new name. All board seats will be held by black and brown technologists, most of whom I once ignored. They'll decide the future now. I hope you never let anyone turn your truth into strategy. Don't follow leaders, become one. Brayden. Samara stared at the letter for a long time. Not because she forgave him, but because he finally did what the world needed most. He stepped aside. Weeks later, back in Washington, D.C., another ceremony unfolded. The Smithsonian had requested not just her card, but the photo of Brayden and Malik. They framed them side by side. One, a handwritten plea from a child. The other, a frozen moment of innocence, before it was stolen by systems too old to care. Samara stood beside her mother, watching as visitors filed past the exhibit marked, echoes of a card. When silence spoke too loud, teachers brought students, grandparents brought grandchildren. A little girl stared up at Samara and whispered, "That card is why I started writing mine." And that's when Samara finally cried. Not for what was lost, but for what had started. Because this time the world didn't move on, it moved forward. When they returned home, the front porch was covered. 1,000 cards, real ones, piled in crates, pinned to the railings, stuffed in mail slots. A neighbor had tried to collect them, but gave up when more kept arriving. Samara stood still. Each envelope bore a child's name. Some in blocky handwriting, some in careful cursive, some with no names at all. Just drawings. Just hope. She picked up one, then another. The first read, "Dear Samara, you made them see me." The second, "You wrote for all of us. Now we're writing back." As she sifted through the sea of letters, Samara paused at one envelope. Older paper, slightly yellowed. No stamp. Inside was a photo of Malik, grown, standing in front of a tech hub in Kenya. On the back, a note, "I never disappeared. I just rebuilt somewhere no one could erase me." If you've ever felt invisible in a room that should have seen you, you understand Samara's fight. Type yes in the comments if her story moved something inside you, and tell us, have you ever been silenced when you tried to speak your truth? Subscribe for more true stories that don't just expose injustice, they ignite change. Because silence has been the system's weapon for too long, now our voices are the answer.